Ricky, hopefully you've had a chance to sort of peruse the indictment. What stood out to you? What do you make of it?
Well, what I think is really critical here is that we had the first, as someone might say, the first shoe to drop when we had the earlier indictment. But this is the second shoe, and it's a big shoe, because one of the things that has been bandied about is that there was hacking. We know that from the first indictment, and we know that from lots of publicity. But here, it goes to who did the hacking. And I think that when you get to the point of looking at Russian intelligence officers, that takes it directly into the government. And so this may be more about solving the second question, the question of the who. Whether or not these people are ever brought to justice in an American courtroom is another matter, but that fact may not be really so important in this indictment. What it does show is that it's not only when we have people in the administration, but certainly also people in parts of the press who have called all of this a witch hunt, that there was really no Russian interference, that at least in terms of an allegation, you have substantial allegations here against people really directly involved in the Russian government. What I do find fascinating is Mr. Rosenstein's public comments about the fact that the president was briefed. So the president did know that this was going to come forward before he met with President Putin. In the past, there has been, I was about to say innuendo or implication, but actually it's been direct, that when President Putin has denied that there was ever any Russian interference with the 2016 presidential election, that it was believed. And it's very difficult for one part of the government, that is the executive, to say that they believe President Putin or that the president believes President Putin, and another thing for the Department of Justice to say, hey, wait a minute. We have 12 defendants here, 11 counts, including the direct forfeiture count of the property that was involved in this illicit activity. So I think that this is a big story. And, here you have, as they say, if it's a witch hunt, you've got 12 more witches.
All right, Ricky, stand by. Let's bring in CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reed. She was at the press conference that was held by the Deputy AG, and she joins us now. So, Paula, what's your takeaway from what we just heard? And to Ricky's point, will we ever see these individuals in a court of law?
Highly unlikely that any of these people will ever be extradited to the U.S. to face charges. We've seen that consistently, not just Russia, but also with China and other foreign actors who they've come out here in the stage. They've announced a great fanfare that they're indicting people for hacking and interfering either with our economy or, in this case, our elections. But none of them have ever been brought here to face trial. They'll often say, well, one day they may want to go to Disney World or something, some way we'll be able to get them. But I think most people would agree Disney World is fun, but it's certainly not worth time in federal prison. So highly unlikely that any of these people will ever see the inside of a U.S. courtroom.
So what do you make of the timing, Paula? I mean, that's a question that Rod Rosenstein was asked. You can't help but to think, right around the corner, he's in just a couple of days, he'll be meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Sure. And of course, his defense to this is always that, look, we wait until we have enough evidence to bring before a grand jury to secure an indictment. And that's not actually a very high bar to score an indictment. But what's more interesting to me is the timing of briefing the president. He said that earlier this week, he briefed the president on these allegations, on these charges, before they were actually made public. That's significant for many reasons. First of all, it seemed that he wanted him to be read in before he went on this trip, before he had this meeting with President Putin. And we know the president is no fan of the special counsel and some days no fan of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. So it is significant. It's notable that he took time to brief him on these charges before his trip. In terms of unsealing the indictment, he says that it's because they had the evidence, but I think a lot of people will make the connection between this indictment where they name names. They're very specific about who did what, when, and how ahead of the president's meeting.
Yeah, and Paula, what's striking about that, the fact that the Deputy AG did brief President Trump before his visit to Europe, is that just this morning the president called the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election a witch hunt. And he was asked about that. He sort of pivoted. And I thought it was interesting that the Deputy AG made a point to say that this is not a partisan, or should not be at least, a partisan issue. It should not be a Democrat or a Republican one. It should be one that unites Americans, and also that it shouldn't be tried on Twitter, on social media, on television, or in congressional hearings.
Yeah. Certainly, and I think he's trying to refer to any sort of attempts from foreign actors to interfere with our elections. That should be something where there's bipartisan support to defend against that. But we know, of course, that is not true. You only had to watch about 5 minutes of the Peter Strzok hearing yesterday to see just how politicized and contentious the Russia investigation has become. So while it does sound nice, you would hope that there would be sort of bipartisan efforts to try to shore up our election systems. Here you saw that they stole the information of over 500,000 voters. They're even hacking into the accounts of staffers who work on administering elections. Clearly, this is a very sophisticated effort. And at this point, it is unclear what exactly the Trump administration is doing or anyone in Congress is doing to prevent this. And we've repeatedly asked the Justice Department as well, what are you doing to protect us in the midterms? It seems that foreign actors are only emboldened so far. And we really haven't gotten any answers about what specifically this administration or Congress is doing to prevent this going forward.